السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. الحمد لله حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى، وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. Alhamdulillah. Thank you guys for your patience. Alhamdulillah. Tonight's class will be the second to the last class before we take our pause for Ramadan, as well as our short trip to Umrah right after Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. So next Thursday, inshallah ta'ala, will be our final class until after our break, inshallah. All right, give me 1 second. Let me grab my notebook. You want the light on back there? Sure. Okay. Okay. So tonight, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to continue. We're going to skip over chapter, I think it was 31, chapter 31, Nikah and Muhrim. And that is the marriage of a person that is in the state of Ihram. The marriage of a person that is performing Hajj or Umrah is in the state of Ihram, that it is normally haram for a person to get married. But that chapter focuses on the Prophet ﷺ marrying Maymuna while he was a muhrim, while he was in the state of Ihram. We'll pass over that because the hadith after that, or the chapter after that, is something that concerns us. And I'm going to share my screen so you guys can see the chapters. 1 second. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
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 Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we are going into Bab Nahyu Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or Nahyi Rasulillah sallallahu alaihi wasallam an nikah al-mut'a akhiran. Akhiran. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited the mut'a marriage for the last time. It says lately there, but it means for the last time, as we're going to see that there was a time when mut'a marriage was permissible. It was something that was allowed. So does anybody know what mut'a marriage is? Has anyone ever heard of this term before? Has anyone been, familiarized themselves with this term?
Is it like a temporary marriage?
Okay, so when you say temporary marriage, what do you mean?
That it's only for a short period of time. It's, it's not something that you're planning to keep in place.
Okay. Yes, and you're absolutely right. That's what a mut'a marriage is. It is a temporary marriage. Does anyone know how long this temporary marriage is? And why it was permitted? Why was it allowed?
Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I had a friend here in Trinidad and she would do the muta marriages for 3 months. I should say if it isn't working out by that, done with it, on to the next.
Well, you do know that mut'a marriage is haram. So
Yes, I told her that.
as we're going to cover tonight, what she's doing is not actually considered a marriage. It's actually considered zina. It's actually considered adultery. And during the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, radiallahu ta'ala anhu, if he found that anyone was doing this, he would stone them to death, because that's the punishment for adultery. Yeah, it's very serious. And the only people that still practice this are the Shiites, a small section or group from amongst them, and we'll get into why they still practice this. But according to the people of the Sunnah, people who follow the Quran and the Sunnah, this marriage is haram until Yawm al-Qiyamah. This, you know, we'll get into it, inshallah. Anyone else? Sister Zakia, Dominga, I saw your hands up. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I don't know why it was allowed in the first place. I haven't researched it. But those who practiced it, they did it for they had a start date in mind and an end date in mind. But I don't know the reasons why it was practiced in the first place.
Okay, we'll get into that. We'll explain why. Sister Amani.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Yeah, I have in my notes here, multi-marriage was only permissible back when the men were away on war. This was made impermissible by scholars. This was permissible in early Islamic years. They specified the time limited in the marriage and the amount in dowry to guard converts' chastity.
There's a lot of truth to what you said. And, you know, as you guys are putting pieces together, hopefully everything that we covered tonight will be the glue to help you put the whole entire puzzle together. All right. And this is and I'm glad that you guys are chiming in and sharing this, because this is the difference between a person who does independent study versus someone who does studying with someone who is learned in the religion. And I'm not saying that that person is me, but what I am saying is that because of my studying and, you know, the skill set that has been given to me by the Islamic University of Medina, and my access to books that many of you may not have access to, I do have a little bit more information to provide you with on the subject. So if you did own your own independent study, and I mean, this is a conclusion that I came to even myself before I had the opportunity to go overseas and study. You know, I did a lot of independent study of myself. And when I got overseas and I started sitting with many of the scholars and, you know, going through the university curriculum, I started to realize that there were a lot of missing pieces to the puzzle that I thought I had, the picture that I thought I had of Islam. And you know, when you're doing your own individual study and you think, okay, I got it. And then you go and you sit with somebody who's learning, you're like, oh, shoot, I missed that. I missed that. I missed that. You know, and this is why it's important. Why some scholars, they say, men ja'ala kitabahu shaykhahu fakana khata'uhu akthar min sawabihi. That whoever makes his book his sheikh will be wrong more than he's right. Your book cannot be your sheikh. Meaning you cannot learn everything that you need to learn about Islam by simply opening a book and reading on your own. You have to be able to go sit and, you know, with somebody who's learned of the religion and have them connect the dots for you. Because as we go through all of this, you're going to say, oh, now I get it. Now I understand why. Now I, you know, and I used to be the same way, sitting in some of the scholars' lessons. I'm like, oh, they're making connections for you that you weren't able to make on your own. And this is why it's always good, you know, do your independent study, but also offset your independent study by sitting with someone who has learned in the deen, so that you can make whatever corrections, or you can actually pinpoint some of the things that you were inaccurate about. Okay, so bab nahyu Rasulillahi sallallahu alaihi wasallam an nikah al-mut'a akhiran or akhiran. The chapter the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam prohibited the prohibition of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam against the nikah of mut'ah, the temporary marriage, akhiran or akhiran, which means the last time that it was made impermissible. And this shows us that from the chapter title that there was a time when mut'ah marriage was permissible, because you can't make something impermissible except that it had to be permissible beforehand. So let's talk about the definition of nikah al-mut'ah. Nikah al-mut'ah, or what is also known as nikah al-mu'aqqad. It is a temporary marriage, a marriage of a man to a woman. Pay attention to the definition. The scholars, they were very detailed when they bring definitions. The marriage of a man to a woman. That eliminates what? The marriage of a man to a man or a woman to a woman. Islam doesn't even recognize that as a marriage. The marriage of a man to a woman. تزويج المرأة إلى أجل فإذا انقضى وقعت الفرقة. That a man marries a woman for a specified time. And when that time arrives, the marriage is over. So number one, it is a marriage. So this is not like two people, boyfriend and girlfriend, just getting together, having a rendezvous. It is a marriage, which means that some of the conditions of a normal marriage are applicable here, like there being a wali, like there being an agreement, and there being a dowry, like there being witnesses, and someone's consent. So all of the conditions of marriage are still present. But what makes this marriage different than a normal marriage? What makes this marriage different?
It has a start time and an end time.
It has a start time and an end time from the very beginning, meaning the two people go into the marriage from the very beginning, knowing and agreeing to the fact that this marriage is not going to last, which means that there is no longevity. Which is why it was ultimately made haram later on, because it goes against the fundamental principle of marriage in Islam, which is istimrariya. Istimrariya, which is longevity. Islamic marriages are designed to be longevous, which is why it's so difficult for divorce. I just went through a whole 2-month curriculum of divorce. And just about every stop we made, it shows you how Islam actually wants the couple to stay together. And that divorce, if we follow the actual process of divorce in Islam, you wouldn't find many of the divorces in our communities the way that you find them. But we don't follow the protocol. We don't follow the protocol. So you'll find divorce being used and abused in the improper way. But if we were to follow the process exactly the way that I described it, it would be impossible for a man to divorce his wife. He would have to wait for a specific time. She's not on her menstrual cycle. He's not been intimate with her. And then after the divorce is pronounced, then you got to wait, 3 menstrual cycles. And then during that time, you're still, you're bringing an arbiter from his family, arbiter from her. All of that is designed to keep the people together, keep the couple together. So mut'ah marriage, it is a marriage between a man and a woman for a specified time. And when that time arrives, the marriage is over. All right. And then another scholar defined the mut'ah marriage as هو أن يتزوج الرجل المرأة إلى أجل معين بقدر معلوم من المال يعني من المهر. That it is the marriage of a man to a woman for a specified time with a specified amount of dowry. Meaning, I'll marry you from this time to this time for this amount of money as a dowry, or for this particular thing as a dowry, and then there's the agreement between them. So this type of marriage, the mut'ah marriage, temporary marriage, it was permissible during the early period of Islam. As the narration of Abdullah ibn Abbas, which is mentioned right here in the chapter, the first hadith where Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma was asked about the mut'ah marriage. Let's go to here, the second hadith. The second hadith. قال إمام البخاري رحمه الله تعالى حدثنا محمد بن بشار قال حدثنا غندر قال حدثنا شعبة عن أبي جمرة قال سمعت ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما سئل عن متعة النساء فرخص فقال له مولى له إنما ذلك في حال الشديد وفي النساء قلة أو نحوه فقال ابن عباس نعم. Then Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, he was giving a verdict when he was asked about mut'ah marriage. Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala anhuma, who was the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked this is all after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was asked about the mut'ah marriage, and he permitted it. And I'll come back to that. All right, he permitted it. This is after the Prophet ﷺ prohibited it, but we'll find out later that Abdullah bin Abbas didn't know that it was actually haram. He didn't know. And it shows you that just because a person is knowledgeable doesn't mean that they know everything, because Abdullah bin Abbas was called Habru Hadhihi al-Ummah. He was called the scholar of this ummah, Tarjuman al-Quran, the interpreter of the Quran. And so someone could say, well, how could somebody like Abdullah bin Abbas not know that this type of marriage is haram? How could he not know? But then when you think back to, if you follow the timeline, how old was Abdullah bin Abbas around the time that the Prophet ﷺ prohibited this? He was a teenager, he was a kid. So it is quite possible that this information missed him. He didn't know about it. Proof is when we go back to the hadith right before this, when Ali bin Abi Talib corrected him, he immediately desisted. He stopped. This is how you know that someone is making a genuine mistake, is that the moment the correction is brought to them, they stop because they didn't know. Whereas if someone brings you correction and you deflect, or you are rejecting, or you're challenging it, then that means that you're operating on your own desires. It's not ignorance, it's hawa. It's not jahl, it's hawa. Because if it was ignorance, soon as the truth was brought to your attention, immediately you would have stopped. Domingo, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so this hadith here, is this the hadith that the Shiites are using for why they say is part of the Sunnah?
No, they actually use an ayah from the Quran, and I'll get to that when we get to the very end.
Okay.
They use an ayah from the Quran. They misinterpret it, obviously, but no, they don't use this. Because if you go back to the first hadith in this chapter, or the second hadith, excuse me. The first hadith in the chapter, Ali bin Abi Talib corrected Ibn Abbas when he heard him giving the verdict saying that it was permissible. It says that Ali said to Abdullah bin Abbas that indeed the Prophet ﷺ prohibited mut'ah marriage. All right, and the eating of donkey's meat. He prohibited it. So this is Ali hearing Abdullah bin Abbas give the verdict that it was permissible to practice mut'ah marriage. When Ali heard him say this, he corrected him. And the Shiites, they follow Ali bin Abi Talib, which is ironic because they believe that Ali should have been the prophet, and they actually worship Ali. They make dua to Ali. Yeah. And so given the fact that Ali is saying here clearly in this narration that it's haram, and of course, they fabricate their own hadith, they make up their own hadith, they actually have their own Quran that they follow. They don't follow the Quran that we follow. If you've ever been to make Hajj or make Umrah, there are tons of Shia in Mecca and Medina. They let them in, for whatever reason, they let them in. They can't stop them. I mean, they do say that they're Muslims. But if you notice, if you've ever prayed alongside of them in Medina, because they'll pray with you, and then as soon as we make the taslim and finish our salat, they'll stand up and pray again. Does anyone know why they do that? Soon as we make the taslim, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, they'll stand up and they'll pray again. Does anyone know
is it because they don't follow the person who is leading the prayer? Like they are in disagreement, so they think their prayer is not valid? That's
exactly why.
Okay.
They don't believe that our prayer is valid, but they believe that you have to pray behind the imam. It's insane. So you have to pray behind the imam, but prayer behind the imam who is not a Shiite is invalid. So you're just praying 4 rak'ah for no reason. So they pray behind the imam because it's wajib to pray behind the imam, but they don't believe prayer behind the imam is wajib. And so therefore, after they make the taslim, they stand up and pray again because they believe that our salah is not valid, and they have to pray again. Insane. Thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for right guidance. Thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are not misguided, that you are upon what is correct to the best of your ability. Man, subhanallah. Not only is misguidance something that will lead you to the hellfire, but it is also taxing on the soul because you are forcing yourself to do more than what's actually necessary. But that's the expense of, that's the price you pay for misguidance. So anyway, in this particular hadith, Abdullah ibn Abbas was asked about the nikah of mut'ah, and he said that it was permissible. Upon hearing this, one of the freed slaves who was one of his students heard Abdullah ibn Abbas say this and said to him that nikah al-mut'ah was only permissible when it was very badly needed, meaning, and we'll explain what that means, fi hal shidda or fi hal shadid, which means that when men were driven by necessity. When would it be a necessity for a man to marry a woman temporarily? This was particular when they went out to fight, jihad. They went on war expeditions. When they're on war expeditions, keep in mind, sometimes they're away from their families for months at a time. And Islam considers the desire of the man, just as it considers the desire of the woman. The beauty with mut'ah is if you look at what he said this is only in the case where it is very badly needed, meaning under dire circumstances, and when women are scarce. Why would Islam permit a temporary marriage when women are only few? Make the connection for me.
The women were not fighting, well, a lot of women were not fighting alongside the men, so most of the women stayed back home with their families, and the men were going out to battle. So I don't think there was a lot of women around the battlefield, with their husbands.
So why would Islam? Yes, you're right. So if men are going out to the battlefield and they go in a fight and the enemy army loses and they take captives of war, and then there are women in that village or in that environment, these men are allowed to marry these women for a short period of time. But why? Why would the women be scarce? Why would there not be a lot of women? Because of course these are women of the enemy side, and not to combat homosexuality. That wasn't even part of their society. You would be hard pressed to try to comb through pre-Islamic Arab society to find homosexuality prevalent. That wasn't prevalent like that. That was more so in other societies like Rome, Persia, those other societies, but you didn't find that as a normal practice. That's not to say that it was non-existent altogether. No, but it wasn't something that was prevalent amongst them. It wasn't something that was acceptable in their society. But women were scarce because when you're out at war, you don't have access to a society of women like you would if you're on the battlefield. So whatever women are left in the battlefield, they are allowed to marry those women for a temporary time. And that is, the temporary time is so that perhaps another man could marry her and enjoy her as well. So it's not like she's being passed around, but if this man marries her with the intention of being married to her for a long period of time, then nobody else would have access to that woman. So in many instances, as we're going to see, the Prophet ﷺ permitted them to marry these women for a period of 3 days. So the temporary marriage was for 3 days. And if a person decided to go beyond that, then that was their agreement. But that was the minimum of 3 days. And if a person decided to go beyond that, then that's between them. But that's the maximum. Yes, Dominga?
So I'm looking I guess it's the same. I have the volume in front of me, like the actual book. And the way is like you'll have chapter 37 and then like the different number hadith. So is it starting from the most current hadith in the chapters? Because the first one says that it's not permissible. And then we went to the second one that is saying that it is. Like, how do I know which one came first?
So that's a good question. So there is no, so what I'm trying to do, there are 4 hadith in this chapter.
Yeah.
So rather than following, because the hadith are not in sequential order, they're
Okay.
not in order in terms of how the events happened.
Yeah.
All right. Imam Bukhari just kind of sticks the hadith in there. All right. So what I'm trying to do is rearrange the hadith as I'm talking in the order in which these events happened. So I started with the second hadith, which talks about it being permitted for, so we're discussing now why it was permitted. All right, so I'll go to the second hadith first. And then I double back and went back to the first hadith to show that Ali ibn Abi Talib corrected Ibn Abbas when he said that it was permissible by telling him that it's not permissible. So go ahead.
So this is also an example of what you just stated, with us just reading the books and not sitting like in like a formal class.
Right.
And I mean, I get it because we're having this conversation, but as I look at the different hadiths, that can be confusing.
Yes, it can. And this is why it's important for you to have a sheikh, an imam, somebody that you learn from to help here again, to connect those dots for you.
Yeah.
Because as I'm looking, even as I'm preparing all of this is all prepared. These are all my notes here. So as I'm preparing all of this, I'm like, Bukhari didn't structure these hadith because this hadith actually should have came first. And perhaps, because here again, this is just a compilation of hadith. The Bukhari is not teaching these hadith to, students. He's just compiling these hadith into chapters based upon his understanding. So there is no rhyme or reason when it comes to someone teaching these hadith, at least not the way that I teach. As I'm going through this, I'm like, all right, I think the first thing people need to understand is why was this marriage even permitted? So then that means that the hadith number 2 should have been the first. And then after we go through that, then we go through his. So this is the way that I teach and what's comfortable for me. So as I'm looking through it, I'm going to rearrange it. And this is what a student of knowledge is supposed to do. Rather than opening a book and just regurgitating to you what's in the book, that's not what a teacher does. A teacher is going to look at it and say, okay, this is not the way that I want to teach this. I'm going to take the information, I'm going to rearrange it, and I'm going to structure it in a way that supports how I want to teach this lesson. And, me being a teacher, and for those of you who are teachers or used to be teachers, we have something called lesson plans, right? Where you go through the curriculum, you take the information, and then you structure it in terms of what you're going to teach first period, what you're going to teach second period, what you're going to teach on Monday, what you're going to teach on Tuesday. And I can tell you that has helped me tremendously in terms of my approach to teaching. It helped me to become more structured and more goal-oriented because that's what a lesson plan is to help you do as a teacher. Help you to become more, what are your goals? What at the end of this lesson, what do you expect your students to know? And I can say that, me being the teacher is probably one of the greatest tools that helped me to become, the teacher that I am when I'm teaching Islam. In these dire straits, Islam permitted temporary marriages to offset the disparities between men and women. So if there were many men and few women, Islam permitted temporary marriages. So the man could be married to this woman for a temporary amount of time. And then after that marriage is over, if she chose to, or if she chose to marry somebody else, she could marry somebody else. And while we sit here and we look at this and we say, oh my God, this woman was married to multiple men and multiple men would be, we're doing that in our society right now. Even within the Muslim community, we're doing that right now. That's not mustaghrab. That's not something amazing. That's not something that, we should be like, yuck. That is what's going on in the Muslim community as I'm speaking. with both brothers and sisters. This is not something that is specific to the brothers. The brothers are not just divorcing sisters and jump into another sister, divorce a sister, jump. Sisters do it too. But we don't necessarily throw the sisters out there. There are not a lot of, like, the only way that you would know that if you know a particular sister and you know a particular group of sisters who do that. But men get a bad rap because we can kind of just see them bouncing all over the place. A man cannot get married except that the imam or some other man in the masjid is, and then the men talk about it. But amongst the circle of sisters, I'm sure you know that there's sisters that have been married 3, 4, 5 times. And while, women usually run with the sob story of, there's been 5 different brothers that did you dirty or did you wrong. It's like, at what point do you take responsibility for that? Because these men couldn't have married you without your permission, without your consent. So you did play a part in that. So if you've been married and divorced 4 or 5 times, it's not all on the brothers that married you and divorced you. I'm sorry. I'm not running with that narrative. Once, maybe, twice, maybe. Fool me once, right? Shame on me. Shame on you. Fool me twice. Shame on me. Because you didn't learn the second time. It's different if a sister's been married and this husband died and, she's been a widow 3, 4, 5 times. That's something different. Those were situations that were out of her control. But you've been divorced 4 or 5 times. So in our community, that's the double standard for the men, because the men will usually catch a bad rap for that. The brothers ain't nothing. They marrying and divorcing these sisters. But then who are the sisters that they're marrying and divorcing? We don't ever hold them to the light and make them take accountability for that. We usually just dump it all on the brothers and keep it pushing, which is not fair. Nonetheless, but that is something that is actually going on in our society right now. We don't call it temporary marriages, but that's exactly what it is. That, even though we're not putting a name to it, that's exactly what is happening in our societies in today's time. And the midway between a mut'a marriage and an actual traditional marriage is a nikah al-misyar, is the arrangement marriage that I spoke about before. That's the middle course between those two extremes. So if a traditional marriage is not what people are usually looking for in today's time, and mut'a marriage is haram, the only middle course between that is nikah al-misyar. It's an arrangement marriage where, okay, it's not the traditional marriage in the sense that I'm there all the time as the husband, or as the woman, you're always cooking for me and, catering to me in that fashion. We arrange our situation based upon our set of circumstances that are particular to us, and we are comfortable with that arrangement. That is the mid-course between that. And we could eliminate a lot of this temporary marriage stuff that we see going on in our communities. But here again, ignorance. We always make our lives more difficult with ignorance. With knowledge, things become far more easy. They become far more easy. Is that common in marriage now? Yes. Absolutely. Why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it be? It's not common in our society because many people don't know about it.
I would think a man would probably, if we're talking about like the marriage of convenience, I would think that the man will probably be a little hesitant in going there. I mean, because I'm all for it. That was something I was looking forward to doing myself. But then I thought that probably was going to be hard to do. A man is not going to accept that type of convenience, especially if you're not there every day, and which made me look into polygyny, because I just don't want to marry every day.
But I would think that it would work out in the best interests of the man, in that if you in today's time, in most of our society, in much of our society in today, they don't want traditional relationships. Most people, men and women, they don't, especially women as they get older, they don't really want a man up under them all the time. They want their freedom, they want their space, whatever the case may be. And some men pretty much feel the same way. We take a lot of pleasure in social gatherings, The man, he has his gathering of friends that he likes to watch the game with. He likes to hang out with. The woman, she likes to, have her time, her me time, or go out with her friends or whatever the case may be. So the rules are kind of relaxed in a misyar marriage. And I would think that that would work out in the favor of both men and women. So you go into it understanding that that is my expectation of you is not to come in like a traditional wife or a traditional husband. You keep your apartment, I keep my apartment. We don't have to merge our lives together. Sometimes I'll come and stay at your place. Sometimes you come and you stay at my place. Sometimes we're going to have pizza for dinner or we're going to order out. And sometimes I'm going to cook. This is the arrangement, but all of that is discussed up front and they go into it with the rules relaxed with very few expectations of one another, other than the agreement that they come to. And I would like to think that that would be something that would work in our favor. But here again, we would still opt for zina on the worst case scenario, or on the other case scenario, marriage and divorce, marriage and divorce, marriage and divorce. Here again, teetering on both extremes, meanwhile, totally neglecting the cool middle. The cool middle. And, so here we are today, man, subhanAllah. This is the end result of ignorance, man. This is the end result of ignorance. Men and women, they either opt for zina, totally disregarding any of the rules and protocols of marriage Islamically, they're going to do it their way. Or the other extreme is to marry, but they know deep down inside they don't want a traditional marriage. And so the marriage is slowly crumbling from the time that they sign the agreement all the way up until the time that the marriage completely crumbles. It's crumbling under their feet because neither one of them went into this with the intention of having a traditional marriage. And what if I told you you didn't have to have it? You didn't have to have it. You could have arranged your situation any way you wanted to. Once you sign that agreement and y'all agree to that, y'all can navigate your situation any way you want to. Islam has given you the parameters. As long as you stay within those parameters, what's wrong? Anyway, one day we'll figure it out. One day we will take Islam and we will learn how to use it to make our lives better, rather than running away from the religion, making our lives worse. So if there were many men and few women, Islam permits temporary marriages. However, what happens when there are few men and too many women? So in the case where there's few women and many men, Islam permits nikah al-mut'ah during that time. Obviously it's haram, but during that time, when women were scarce and there were a lot of men, man can marry a woman, be with her for 3 days, they separate, she marries someone else. What happens in the case where there are not many men, but there are too many women?
Is this where polygyny comes in?
This is exactly where polygyny comes in.
Okay.
What polygyny represents is an opportunity for marriage for every woman in society. If we said there's one woman to one man, and there's a female to male ratio of 6 to 1, do the math. Numbers don't lie. Men lie, women lie, numbers don't lie. If there's a 6 to 1 ratio, meaning for every 6 women, there's 1 man. And we said that in our society, there's a female to male ratio of 6 to 1. And there's only 1 man to 1 woman. Then that means that what is the percentage of women who will not get married? 90. Because if there's only 1 man, that 1 man represents 10%. Do the numbers. That 1 man to every 6 women represents 10%. So that means that out of every 6 women, 5 of them will not get married. 5 of them won't be married. That's 90%. If that's not what is happening in our society right now, I'm talking about within the African-American Muslim community. I don't know what's happening. You tell me. And we still fight against polygyny. We still fight against it. I hate that. I would never do this. I would never do that. Polygyny was the benefit. It was revealed as a benefit for the woman, not for the man. The man doesn't necessarily benefit from that. If you say, oh, well, he gets to sleep with another woman, do you think that the sexual intimacy that he's getting from that woman equates with everything that he has to give that woman? It's not equal. All he's getting is sexual intimacy, but he has to provide for her a house. He has to provide clothing, has to provide food, has to provide protection. As a man in polygyny right now, I could be with one wife and something happens and I put my life on the line, which has happened on many occasions, has happened.
Okay.
I put my life on the line, then I deprive my kids from my other wife. I deprive them of my presence because I put my life on the line for her in that moment. So that's the protection. And it's not, my life is not worth or equivalent to sexual intimacy from a woman. I would like to think that my life is worth far more than that. But this is the way that women chalk it up. Oh, you got another woman you can have sex with. It's like, yeah, but I still have to protect her. If we're out and about and somebody says something to her or tries to attack her, I put my life on the line. You think my life is equivalent to what is between her legs? Are you kidding me? That's what we've chalked it up to? That my life is equivalent to what is between her legs? I get up and go to work and hurt myself at work for what is between her legs? Is that what we're equating an entire man's life to? What is between the legs of a woman? You've got to be kidding me. So it's not just, oh, the man has another woman he can have sex with. That's only part of the deal. But what he is giving to that woman is far more than what he is receiving from her. Far more. It's not even equal. Just the fact that a man works a job where he puts his life at risk every single time he goes to work. It's not equivalent. There's how do you justify that? So I think we really need to take another look at that. We kind of chalk it up as a man being able to have sex with another woman, and that's all it's about. Like, you got to be kidding me. And sex might not even be that much importance in some cases. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, sex is a non-factor, at least a quarter of the time, at least 40% of the time, because she only has 2 weeks to be intimate. And then the other 2 weeks is on her menstrual cycle. I mean, so you think about it, every month, he only has 2 weeks within that month to be intimate with his wife, because the other 2 weeks is her body preparing for her menstrual cycle, which some women start to have cramps and their body is not in the, they're not in the mood to be intimate even before the menstrual cycle comes on. And then, of course, when the menstrual cycle comes on, forget it, all bets are off. So you only get to be, and then even within the 2 weeks that she is not on her menstrual cycle or not preparing for her menstrual cycle, only a few of those days she's ovulating, which is where she is at the heightened sense of her peak of sexuality. So after that period of ovulation is over with, she doesn't, if we have it, we have it. If we don't, we don't. It's not really a big deal. So how much is the man really, if we break this down, how much is he really benefiting from the woman in polygyny? I mean, you guys need to rethink this, because it is not about him having another woman to have sex with. It is far deeper than that. And it's very unfortunate that, this is what we've come to. And I get it, we're a hypersexualized society, so everything with us is filtered through the act of sexual intimacy. Everything is filtered. I mean, even now they have this thing, pause, where you can't even say certain things except that you have to say pause, or you have to say, yo, bro, hey, yo, this is all you hear in the middle school. I'm teaching middle school. Middle schoolers, all you hear. Hey, yo, brother Shadid, pause. It's just like, I can't even say, we were taking a quiz one day, and I blurted out, not even realizing I was saying it, to a bunch of 8th graders. I said, go hard or go home. They're like, oh, brother Shadid, a'udhu billah, pause, brother. You can't say, I'm just like, what? I can't say nothing around y'all, man, because hyper-sexualized society. Everything is filtered through the act of sexual intimacy. Everything. And so it's quite natural that, when we start talking about polygyny, the first thing that everybody's mind goes to is, oh, he has another woman he can have sex with, So the beauty of Islam is that in the event of women being scarce during that time, Islam permitted mut'a marriage to accommodate the men. And although that is haram until Yawm al-Qiyamah, in the event that there is more women than it is men, Islam permits polygyny so that every woman has an opportunity, every woman has a shot at marriage. Every woman has a shot at being provided for and being protected, not about sexual intimacy. So Islam, so you look at how religious injunctions constantly consider the condition of people during times of prosperity and during times of hardship and adversity. In times of hardship, when women are scarce and the desires of man have to be contained, then Islam permitted mut'a. And in times of prosperity, or in times of prosperity where men and all of the resources that they provide and the protection that they provide, is present, although the men might be few, but what they can provide, their resources, is enough to cover multiple women. All right, because even though men might be scarce, they have enough resources to cover multiple families. So it might be one man, but that one man's resources, if we were to spread that out over 4 women, his resources could probably cover up to 4 women, and his protection as well. So Islam permits that. However, the mut'a marriage was for a particular period of time, meaning when the condition of the Muslims changed, so did the permission or the allowance of this type of marriage. So mut'a marriage is where a man says to a woman, marry me for this particular amount of time, for this amount of dowry, and the woman gives her consent. And in one narration, it was for 3 days. So if you scroll down to right here, the hadith of Salma ibn Aqwa, عن أبيهما رجل وامرأة توافقا فعشرة ما بينهما 3 ليالي 3 ليال فإن أحب أن يتزايد أو يتتارك فما أدري أي شيء كان لنا فما أدري أشيء كان لنا خاص أم للناس عامة. So in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a man and a woman agree to marry temporarily, hadith is right here in front of you, if they agree to marry temporarily, then their marriage should last for 3 nights. That's the max. 3 nights. And if they like to continue beyond that, then they can do so. And if they want to separate, then they could do so. And Salma ibn Aqwa, on the authority of his father said, I don't know if this was something that was specific for us, meaning the Sahaba, or something that the Prophet ﷺ made general for all people outside of us. And Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu made it clear that the Prophet ﷺ made mut'a marriage haram afterwards. And we'll get into when he actually prohibited it. But this hadith lets us know that the maximum amount of time the Prophet, or the mere minimum amount of time the Prophet ﷺ permitted this was for a man to be with a woman for 3 nights. At a very minimum 3 nights. And if you guys decide that y'all want to go longer than that, then you can do that. But here again, they're on war. As there's another narration that mentioned that some of the Sahaba said they don't know that the Prophet ﷺ permitted mut'a marriage, except when the Sahaba were on war traveling outside of Medina, meaning this was not something that was done inside the city of Medina. This was specific for the group that went out on war expeditions that were away from their families for a specific amount of time. Understanding the need of man, right? And so now my question would be, well, why wouldn't Islam permit for a woman to be married temporarily or a woman to engage even though her husband is gone? Why does Islam permit the man to do that and not the woman?
For the protection of if she gets pregnant, it would be harder to tell who's the father.
Okay. That's one. And then, of course, a man cannot handle his woman being with another man the way that a woman could handle her husband being with another woman. A man cannot handle that. A man would never be able to handle that. We weren't designed like that as men to be able to be tolerant of, and this is why any man who does that, this polyamory marriages that, or relationships that you find people engaging in today, what they call open marriages, where they kind of open their marriages up to allow each spouse to see other people, you'll find that this is a man that's, in Islam, according to Islamic standards, this would be the lowest of low men on the totem pole. This individual wouldn't even be considered a man, according to Islamic standards. No ghira, no jealousy, no modesty, no rujula, no manhood, no nothing. This would not even be considered a man. This would be considered the weakest of men on the totem pole of men. So Islam doesn't permit that. So the Prophet ﷺ permitted the men to be with the woman for 3 nights. And if they decided, and of course, yes, to keep her honor. Yes, and that's very different for women. Absolutely. Absolutely. And a woman's body is not designed to welcome multiple, like a man is entering your body and bringing energy with him as he enters into your body. And so when a woman opens herself up to be intimate with multiple men, she is opening herself up to multiple, forms of energy that is entering inside of her body. And that's not something that, is normal for a woman. That's not something that Islam would ever permit, Not to mention that when men are going on war expeditions, women have way more self-control than men do. Evidenced by the fact that the woman at home, because someone could say, well, if these men were out on war expeditions, gone for months at a time, and they were permitted to, have a temporary marriage with a woman to satisfy their desires, what about their wives at home? The women at home have way more self-control and discipline. We're talking about women who have a spiritual core, women who are not out in the streets and, mingling with men. That wasn't that type of society. That's not the type of society that Islam creates for women, which is why the Prophet ﷺ said the best place for a woman to pray is where? Her home. Best place for her to pray is her home. That the woman should not allow any strange man into her home without her husband's permission. The home is the safest place for the woman. And as long as she stays within those parameters, she's not exposed to anything that would arouse the desire. Whereas a man going out to work, man going out to war expeditions, non-Muslims bringing their women onto the battlefield. Sometimes these women are dressed scantily clad, to distract them. Yes, they would bring their women dressed certain way in order to distract. And of course, this would be the slave girls, not their wives. Sometimes they would bring their wives, they would bring their daughters to, cheer them on, but they would also bring their slave girls and they would, use them as a distraction. So they would be dressed a certain type of way and in some instances naked to, distract the soldiers. And so men being exposed to this type of stuff after the war is over, obviously the desire is there. The adrenaline is pumping, the testosterone is at sky high levels. And then there's no one there to satisfy that desire with. So Islam permits temporary marriage. Islam permits, you know, the taking of concubines, which are women who are captives of war. These are captives of war, and it doesn't need to be marriage. You can just, that's part of the laws of war. Women knew if they got caught, then you become a captive of war. They knew that. So Islam deals with men and women differently, doesn't put women in those type of situations, nor should a woman put herself in those type of situations. In today's time, it's really sad because women would always use the argument, well, women have needs because women have now put themselves in a position of being men. Women are the new men in our society, in American society. They are the new men because women will argue and advocate for the satisfaction of their desires as if they were men. Well, what about a woman? She has women, we got needs. But your needs for sexual intimacy, what you want is sexual intimacy. What a man wants is sex. Completely different. What's the difference between the two?
Please explain.
Yes. No, I want you to explain because some of you know what I'm talking about.
I have an idea, but from a man's perspective, just curious. I want to hear your response.
So from a man's perspective, sex for a man is the physical aspect. No emotion involved, no emotional connection, no nothing. A man doesn't have to be intimate with a woman and bring his emotions to the relationship as well. A man can sleep with a woman and feel nothing for her. Nothing. Because it's just purely the physical act of satisfying his sexual appetite. For a woman, on the other hand, and we're talking about a woman's woman, we're not talking about a woman who's grown up in a society and constantly pinning herself up against men or making herself equal with men in every single regard to the point where there is no distinction between a man and a woman. That's not the type of woman I'm referring to. I'm talking about a woman who will only open her legs to entertain a man if there is some type of emotional connection involved. Period. If there is an emotional connection involved, period. She's not going to allow a man to engage her sexually because number one, she values herself way too much to allow that to happen. Number two, sexual intimacy is more than just the physical for her. It's not about physical penetration. It's about the physical, the mental, the emotional stimulation. The physical is just, it's just a manifestation of what she's feeling for him mentally and emotionally. And once you unlock that, then you unlock the physical. But until then, you don't unlock anything. I would like to think that most women are not even stimulated by a man if they're not stimulated mentally and emotionally. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That's absolutely correct.
Someone said, for men, sex is an act to release. For women, is their emotional connection. Right. Sex for men is physical act. Well, it's not just physical. I mean, obviously, when a man is in a relationship with a woman, there is some emotional connection, but we don't lead with our emotions. We don't have to be in the mood to have sex. You understand? Whereas a woman, on the other hand, in many instances, she has to be in the mood. For an example, if one of her relatives just passed away and you guys went to a janazah together, the man went to the janazah with his wife because her aunt just passed away. When he gets home with her, you think that she's going to be in a space to be intimate with him? He don't care. He wants to have sex whenever it's offered. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think I speak for all men. We don't have, I gotta be in the mood. We are always in the mood. Always. Always. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the circumstance because our emotions do not control our sexual appetite. Our sexual appetite is not controlled by our emotions. It's controlled by testosterone. It's controlled by, other chemicals going on inside of our body. And the more testosterone, and our peak testosterone is when we're like 19, 20, 21. And this is why they're out, now having sex like jackrabbits with everybody. I just seen a rapper who was posted in a picture on Instagram and 5 women standing around him. All of them is his baby mother. He got all of them pregnant at the same time. La ilaha illallah. Yeah. This is why you have what you have. You know, some of these rappers, this one, that one, they got 4, 5, 6 different baby mothers. And you look at the age. Look at the age. So, yeah. It's different for men than it is for women. You know, so the Prophet ﷺ permitted that for 3 days and then told the couple if they decided to go beyond the 3 days that they could. And if they decided to leave it at that moment, then they could leave it. And Aqwa, he said, I don't know if the Prophet ﷺ is making this permissible for us, meaning the Sahaba, or for everybody. But this marriage was ultimately prohibited. It was ultimately prohibited after the conquest of Mecca. However, some scholars are of the opinion that this particular marriage was prohibited after the Battle of Khaybar, which was after the 7th year after Hijrah. It was collected in Sahih Muslim, where the Prophet ﷺ said, Ya ayyuhan nas, inni qad kuntu adhantu lakum fil istimta' min al-nisa. وإن الله قد حرم ذلك إلى يوم القيامة فمن كان عنده منهن شيء فليخلي سبيله ولا تأخذوا مما آتيتموهن شيئا. The Prophet ﷺ said, O people, O men, I previously permitted you to engage in mut'a marriage where you enjoyed the women for a temporary time. He said, and indeed Allah has made this marriage haram until Yawm al-Qiyamah. So whoever from amongst you has a woman now with him as a temporary marriage, then you need to let her go from this point. Let her go. Cancel the marriage from this point forward. And whatever you offered her as a dowry, don't take anything of it back. And why is he saying that? He's saying that because if you said that I'll be with you for the next 10 days and I'm going to give you this as a dowry, you're giving her that as a dowry with the condition that you fulfill your 10 days. So now the Prophet ﷺ is saying, all of this is canceled now. We're done with the temporary marriage now. So any of you that made a promise to a woman, you let her go now, and whatever dowry you promised her, you still got to give it to her. Don't take anything back from her. However, there's a discrepancy that revolves around whether this was prohibited during the conquest of Mecca after the Prophet ﷺ conquered Mecca, which was in the 8th year after Hijrah, or whether it was prohibited after the Battle of Khaybar, which was in the 7th year after Hijrah. Some scholars say that it was prohibited in the 7th year after Hijrah, after the Battle of Khaybar, and some say that it was prohibited after the conquest of Mecca. Some scholars combine these two narrations and say the Prophet ﷺ prohibited it after the Battle of Khaybar, and then during the conquest of Mecca, they were away from Medina for a while. The Prophet ﷺ permitted it for 3 days, and then after that 3 days, it was haram until Yawm al-Qiyamah. So that means that it was permitted, it was prohibited after the Battle of Khaybar, then permitted one more time for 3 days, and then prohibited until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And so the thing with mut'a marriage, there is no inheritance. The woman does not inherit. Even if the husband dies during the time that they had contracted. Let's say they contracted for 10 days. He died after the 3rd day. She still gets none of his inheritance because that's part of the arrangement. And most men try to avoid getting a woman pregnant during this time. And how did they avoid pregnancy? Were there prophylactics or there, pills? How did they prevent pregnancy during that time?
They probably just removed themselves before they released themselves.
Yes. Coitus interruptus. Yes. That was the way that they would prevent children, because you don't want a child being born under those particular circumstances. You had a quick temporary marriage with a woman, and then in that temporary time, that period of time, you got the woman pregnant and she had your child. You would have a lot of explaining to do to your child. So, and the reason why it was prohibited after the conquest of Mecca is because the origin of marriage in Islam is istimrariya, which is longevity, and the nikah of mut'ah goes against the principle of longevity because it's a temporary marriage. And also because the nikah of mut'ah is solely about satisfying the sexual appetite. It has nothing to do with love, has nothing to do with companionship, has nothing to do with any of that. It is solely about sexual intimacy. And the traditional marriage in Islam is not about sexual intimacy. Sexual intimacy is a part of it, but it is not solely based upon sexual intimacy. And that is the problem that we are having in our communities in today's time, is that many men, I would like to think more so men than women ever, that they turn marriage into an opportunity to satisfy their sexual appetite. Totally overlooking that that's only one aspect of marriage in Islam. That is not the whole of marriage in Islam. And because we come from hypersexualized societies, we tend to think that marriage in Islam is solely about sex. And so you'll hear a lot of brothers say, I want to protect myself from doing something that is haram. That's what the Sahaba did with mut'ah marriage. That's not what they did with traditional marriages. You see the difference? Men will say today, I need to get married so to protect myself from doing something that is haram. That is exactly the reason why Islam permitted mut'ah marriage. So men didn't do anything that was haram. And so we are now using traditional marriages where there should be love, there should be companionship, there should be, there should be parenting because there should be children involved. There should be part of the overall fabric of the Muslim community as a whole. All of those things are overlooked, and we have narrowed down marriage in Islam totally for sexual intimacy. Wallahi, I was in Canada years ago, and I was holding a seminar in Canada, and there was a sister, believe it or not, a sister who said that I only marry for sexual intimacy. I don't marry for anything else. I said, well, that's not the goal of marriage in Islam. She said, well, these brothers don't want anything else from the marriage. So I've given up offering anything more in a marriage other than satisfying my sexual desire. I said, yikes, man. That's where we are. But she was speaking to an entire population of Muslims. She's speaking to what is going on in an entire population amongst the Muslim community. It just sounds weird coming out of the mouth of a woman because you don't expect women to voice that. You usually expect a man to be bold enough to say something like that, but she was speaking her truth. And so it was reported that some of the Sahaba continued to practice mut'ah marriage, even though the Prophet ﷺ made it haram. And that was because many of them did not know that it was haram. Like Jabir ibn Abdullah, Abdullah ibn Abbas, many of them, they were teenagers at the time that the Prophet ﷺ made it haram. At the conquest of Mecca, many of them, they were teenagers. Abdullah ibn Abbas was 16, 17. These were kids. And so it is possible that even though they became knowledgeable scholars later on, that the knowledge of mut'ah being haram passed them by. They didn't know. Evidenced by the fact that when they were corrected, they immediately went with the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ in it being haram. To be honest, I felt for some time that Muslim men aren't attached to Muslim women these days. Well, why do you say that? What do you mean attached? What do you mean by that? Muslim men aren't attached to Muslim women these days. What do you mean by that?
It sounds like the men are like halfway in the deen and halfway in the dunya. Like it's, they're yeah.
Oh, you said you meant attracted. Men
No.
aren't attracted. Well, there's some disadvantages that men have. When you think of a lot of Muslim sisters, and I'm just going to be completely honest with you. I'm going to be honest with you guys. This is the only way that I know how to communicate. there are a lot of Muslim women in the community, in the Muslim, especially amongst the African American Muslim community, that don't necessarily take care of themselves in terms of health wise. And I'm talking about in terms of what men can see externally, and that is their weight. You have a lot of sisters that, you know, are overweight, a lot of sisters that appear to be overweight. And while there may be a small population of men that may be okay with a woman, you know, of a particular size, most men don't desire that. That's not desirable to most men. And so you have a lot of sisters that go about their daily regimen of going to work, and they pray and they fast and they do all these great things, but they don't take care of their health. And so externally, outside, you know, what they can see outside, it is unattractive. Factor that in, along with that, you have a lot of sisters who go to either one extreme or the other when it comes to how they step outside. Either sisters go over the top with a bunch of makeup on and tight abayas on, and while brothers may find that attractive, they're not going to wife you. They want to have sex with you. They want to marry you in order to test the ride and see how it works. But there is nothing longevous about that, because they know that once they marry you, you're still going to continue dressing like that. You're still going to continue. You belong to the streets, as they say. So they're not going to invest what a man usually would invest in a situation that he's trying to keep long term. They're not going to invest in that, because how they get you is how they're going to lose you. They got you because of how you dressed, how you came, how you presented yourself. And they know ultimately that's how they're going to lose you as well. So they don't invest. They go in with the intention not to invest. And then on the other side of that is the sisters who don't do anything to themselves. They don't, you know, the overgarment is wrinkled, or they don't have on an overgarment. They don't really, Islam is not really that important. And, you know, the hijab is back here, you know, it's just like, they don't want that either. As a matter of fact, that is probably the most unattractive of all Muslim women in the community. Muslim men do not find that attractive. Here again, don't confuse a man pursuing you because he wants to sleep with you, or he wants to test it out to see what it's hitting for, versus a man who's actually pursuing you because he sees a future with you. There's a completely different, there's a huge difference between these two. And the sister who wears her hijab back here with her hair showing, makeup on her face, or the overgarment skin tight where he can see, you know, he's not thinking, I'm going to wife her and we're going to have a long, healthy relationship. He's not even thinking like that. He's thinking, oh, she's cute, she's pretty. I know she ain't really on no dean. She ain't really somebody that I can invest in like that. So I'm going to pursue her for the reason that most men would probably pursue her, and that is to just sleep with her. I just had someone feel some type of way because I'm choosing to go harder in my practices because of being more aware. He's touching my keyboard, which is connected to the computer. I'm sorry. Being more aware of the mistakes I was making because of lacking in knowledge. I mean, the thing is that keep pursuing, you know, the best version of yourself. I mean, because you're not doing that so a man can recognize you. Yes, it would be nice to invest in yourself and then have, you know, a man see that investment that you're making in yourself and pursue you because of that, because then it makes it all worth it. Yes, in an ideal world, yes, that would be great. But, you know, you have to continue to invest in yourself and continue making dua and continue putting yourself in environments where the type of men that you're looking for frequent. You got to think about the type of man that you're looking for and what type of environment that man would be in. What type of brother are you looking for? And then ask yourself, where would that particular type of brother be? Where would he be? Might be in the masjid, might be at work, might be at Walmart or Target, might be at the laundromat, might be You know, you got to think, where would this type of brother, envision the brother that you want to be with, and then ask yourself, where would this brother be? Because that brother, 9 times out of 10, if he's a religious, upright, good brother, he's not out in the streets. He's not at the hookah bar. He's not at the restaurant with a bunch of friends sitting around having a drink. He's not in those places. Lowe's, I see a lot of brothers in Lowe's. Home Depot, a lot of brothers. They doing work on their homes. They own businesses. Yeah, man. You got to think, where would this brother be? At the masjid on Jumu'ah, might not be at the masjid on a Thursday night. But daggone sure at masjid on Jumu'ah. And as you leaving out of the masjid, you know, you take a glance in the direction of the brothers and you spot someone that, you know, that you have an interest in, then you find your wali, you find, you know, someone that knows him. Let me get some more information. You start doing your research on the brother until you find out what you need to know.
That's the thing, though. You don't know who you're looking at. So you don't be looking at somebody's husband.
Yeah.
Not knowing if you're out of pocket. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it. But here again, we did cover the hadith of the permissibility of a woman, you know, pursuing. So, I mean, it doesn't hurt for you to ask the brother or send somebody over to the brother or find out, you know, you saw his picture and then maybe you kind of go on social media, find out who it is. The most important thing is to always put a buffer between yourself and him. Never pursue him directly. Always have a wali, an imam, somebody that you can pass it off to. Can you find out if this brother's married? You find out if this brother's looking for another wife. Find out what you can find out about this brother. You are secretly doing your research behind the scenes before you even make a move. This is the advantage that you have as a woman. As a man, we don't really have anybody that we can go to find out who the sister is. We don't really have anybody unless he has a sister or mom or aunt or somebody, you know, that he trusts from amongst the women. But you are more at an advantage as a woman than we are as men. As well as in the fact that you can see exactly what you're getting, whereas you wear overgarments, so the man has no clue, no idea what's going on, you know, beyond the overgarment. So you are at far more of an advantage than we are as men. So, you know, use your resources. Identify all of the resources that you have at your beck that you can use and utilize them. But, you know, you have to think, where would the guy that you're looking for, where would he be? And then, you know, try to arrange that. So, inshallah ta'ala, we'll stop here. So next week's class will be our final class before we break for Ramadan. And then we're going to make Umrah, and then after Umrah, inshallah, we'll pick up right where we left off. And in next week's class, inshallah ta'ala, we'll start with, we'll talk about the Shia and why they still consider, you know, mut'ah permissible and how scholars view that and some of the evidence that they use to support their approach to it. But as far as those of us who follow the Quran and the Sunnah, mut'ah is haram until Yawm al-Qiyamah. Never to be permitted again. And anyone who engages in that practice is considered adultery, especially if the person has been married before. And if the person has never been married before, then it's considered fornication. But if they've been married before and then they engage in mut'ah with somebody else, that is considered adultery. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his protection. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for his guidance and to keep us rightly guided, man. It is, you know, so important to make sure that we remain grounded in the Quran and the Sunnah, man. Subhanallah, man. All right, jazakumullahu khairan wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallama tasliman kathira wa subhanaka rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. If you guys didn't know, then you do know now that we have a fundraiser for Roda Islamic Center of Delaware and Maryland. Next Sunday, inshallah ta'ala, we have food. We have Dr. Tariq Waya, who will be joining us as our keynote speaker. So please come out and support. Alhamdulillah, if you're in the area, please come out, support Roda and what we're doing bi'idhnillah as we prepare for Ramadan. We will have the masjid is open for all 5 salat. We will have Taraweeh here every single night. We will have iftar here every single night, alhamdulillah. So if you're in the area, please come out and benefit, inshallah. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum
Eyes
salam.
back.
Walaikum
Will
salam.
do.
Here, Briket.